So today let's talk about principles of motor learning and how they can help generalization happen faster. Hi, I'm Amy Graham, a speech language pathologist in Colorado, and I specialize in speech sound disorders. So principles of motor learning kind of are the how in what we're practicing when we're doing speech therapy. The principles that guide how we practice to help encourage generalization are those motor learning principles. And there are specific principles that we can make sure that we're including into our therapy to actually help promote generalization to happen quicker. For example, what you're targeting can actually help with generalization. When we're acquiring a skill or we're teaching a child to acquire a new sound, our targets are really simple. We want those sounds, those words to be facilitative, meaning I want the word that I'm going to practice to make that particular sound easy to say. So our words tend to be monosyllabic in early therapy to help that child achieve that correct placement and acquire the skill to actually produce that sound. But if we're looking at how can we help that child then generalize that sound outside of your therapy room to other words they haven't practiced yet, we need to think about how we can actually increase the complexity of that word. So increasing complexity of the targets itself will actually help encourage generalization. So for example, if we're practicing words like red, read, road to help get that prevocalic R, and they've got it and it's so much easier, let's pick more complex targets like railroad or reading. Just multisyllabic words in and of itself can make that target more complex and help facilitate generalization. Another principle, what we call blocked versus random practice. So when we're at the beginning phases of therapy and we're just teaching the child to acquire the skill to produce the sound, we're going to take a word and get lots of practice of that word in a blocked way.
Tire, tire. Fire, fire. That's not right. Get out now. Fire, fire, fire.
Meaning if we're just learning the word red, we're gonna practice that 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, however long it takes for that child to acquire the skill to say the R sound in that word. But if we're moving towards generalization, we're gonna switch gears a little bit and move away from blocked therapy to random practice. Meaning, instead of saying red 5 times when they're taking a turn, we're going to maybe have 5 different words that we're gonna point to randomly and expect them to say it. So it might be read, road, red, run.
Rock, crazy, run, breakfast, rocket, train, race, creek, rag, truck, rot, frog, ramp, round, rally, price, rough, frozen, runny, present, runt.
And random practice actually helps facilitate generalization as well. Next principle is constant practice versus variable practice. So constant practice at that beginning stage, elicitation stage, or just the acquisition phase of therapy is where we're literally not changing anything about what we're practicing, right? We're not changing our intonation, we're not changing the complexity, we're just practicing that target as is over and over to achieve acquisition of the skill. But once they've acquired that and they're producing that particular sound well in those words, we want to look at how we can help vary that practice instead of remaining constant. So one really fun way and great way to vary your practice is change your prosody. So say it like a question, red. Say it like you're surprised, red. Say it like you're sad, red. Say it in a whisper, red. Just changing aspects of your prosodic intonation while you're practicing those target words will help lead to generalization. Another principle is how, when, and how frequently we are giving our feedback to kids. So when you're at that acquisition phase, it's really frequent because if a child makes a mistake, we want to fix it right then so we don't get that negative practice. So our feedback is going to be really frequent and it's going to be really specific. So if they said wed for red, we're going to jump in and help them correct it and give them a cue like, oh, I saw that you used your lips, let's use your tongue, and be very specific in your cueing strategies. But if we want to then move to that generalization phase, we need to switch up the frequency that we give feedback. So we don't have to give it on every utterance, maybe every other utterance. And then we need to be more general in our feedback as well too. So if I have a child who has acquired the ability to produce that target sound, I might say something like, that wasn't quite it. Do you think you can fix it? And see if they can rely on what they've learned in order to fix or correct that particular sound that they made an error. Another aspect of feedback is at the acquisition phase, we are very instantaneous in our feedback, right? We want to correct that inaccurate production. But if we're at that generalization phase, we're going to wait half a beat. We're going to give them a second or two. And so our feedback needs to be more delayed. And what that does is it gives them time to see if they will start to self-correct. Can they self-monitor? And if they don't self-correct, that's when you can jump in with that generalized feedback and say something like, ooh, that wasn't quite it. Do you think you can fix it? Next motor learning principle is massed practice when you're acquiring a skill, meaning we're getting lots and lots of practice over a short period of time. That's what happens in speech therapy. During that half-hour session that you're getting lots and lots of accurate trials of that particular word or that particular sound, you're getting massed practice. If we want to move to generalization, we need to distribute that practice over longer periods of time, meaning not just practicing in the therapy room, but maybe outside of the therapy room. And I'll be honest, that is probably one of the hardest things to get is practice outside of the therapy room. So maybe we can think of creative ways to help encourage that. But first of all, remember, we're not going to worry about generalization unless acquisition has taken place, meaning I'm confident that the child has acquired the ability to produce the target words that I want them to practice outside of the therapy room. If I'm not confident that that practice outside of my room will be accurate, like close to 100% accurate, then I do not encourage homework or practice outside of therapy just because it's going to reinforce inaccurate productions. So make sure that they're ready for that distributed practice if you're at that phase where you're wanting to move to generalization. Some of the ways I have found that helps a lot of my kids get a little bit more buy-in for therapy practice outside of the therapy room is I will tell a lot of my, especially older children, that I only want them to practice for no more than 2 minutes at a time. And I'll hand them and give them the target words or sentences or whatever we've been practicing in therapy so that I know that they can do it accurately. And then when I say that 2 minutes at a time, that's very doable. It's not something that they have to sit down for 15 minutes and drill, because I guarantee you most kids and even parents that are practicing with their kids, if they're sitting down for 15 minutes of practice, it's probably not going to be accurate because you're asking that family to literally do therapy at home. And I don't want them to do therapy. I just want them to practice some accuracy here and there, a little bit sprinkled throughout the week. So what I'll do is I'll tell them to do those 2 minutes of therapy, or 2 minutes of practice rather, but try to do it 3 times a day. Do it at breakfast, at lunch, at dinner, before school, after school, at bedtime. And my hope, honestly, is that maybe they'll do it once every other day. But I tell them to do it a lot just so that they can understand the importance of getting that distributed practice. For most of my kids, what I have found, generalization often takes place at the word level practice or phoneme loaded phrase level practice. I know we tend to think of Van Riper style hierarchy, that we have to practice words all the way up to spontaneous or conversational speech. And I'll be honest, I find generalization often takes place without having to practice talking or using your sound in spontaneous speech if I'm getting motor learning style practice in my therapy and encouraging that distributed practice throughout the week. I have homework packets for different sounds, R, S, SH, that are available on my website, grahamspeechtherapy.com. If you need help figuring out how to incorporate these motor learning principles in your session, I have a 1-hour course all about generalization strategies, and I have homework packets that also incorporate random practice and other motor learning principles that we've talked about embedded in those homework packets. Both of those are linked down below. Again, I'm Amy Graham. Check out my website, grahamspeechtherapy.com, for more helpful speech sound disorder resources.